All right, so welcome to this BachTalk tonight. We are in the midst of our season, One Long River of Song. I'm Amanda McFadden, the Associate Artistic Director with Sonoma Bach, and I'm joined with Diana and Bob. And so I'm going to be doing some talking about our upcoming concert in April. And give a little context to where we are along this one long river, and just as sort of logistics. If you have any questions or anything that come up during the talk, you're welcome to drop something in the chat. Diana will have eyes on the chat and will jump in as needed. And so here we go. So I did this view. If you happened to come to my Bach talk in December, I started with the first four concerts of the One Long River of Song, and now we were flipping over to having our final concerts of the spring. We just got done with exploring the 18th century during our organ recital with Annie Laver and the debut of the Wild Rose Treble Ensemble. And we're heading into the Romantic period. And so actually, we have a concert coming up next weekend with the Green Mountain Consort that is going to be focused on part songs in the Romantic era. And I've asked Bob to give us a little preview of that concert as well, before I dive into the Brahms, because they kind of go hand in hand. And in fact, we are doing some Brahms within that concert as well. And then I'll take over and talk a little bit about Brahms and the Geometry of Hope. And then we won't talk about this today, but just for your own knowledge, we have I can't actually see the title, Music for Modern Times, as our final concert in May. So I'm going to hand it to Bob, who is going to give a little bit of an intro, a little bit of a preview into part songs in the Romantic era, which is coming up on the 28th and 29th of this month. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, there are still tickets available for Saturday evening. It's going to be a glorious concert. So Bob, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, it seems to make sense to give not just a little promo, but a little bit of to kind of define a link here as we go through our One Long River of Song. If you haven't already checked that out, the concept is simple. It's essentially that we're doing 7 concerts in more or less chronological order. So we started with medieval music, and of course, we lavished time and energy on Renaissance music and Baroque music, and here we are in the 19th century. And we had to juggle a little bit to make it work, because normally we would finish with the big Bach choir production with the orchestra and such in the late spring. But because we wanted to do some modern music, 20th and 21st century music, we had to kind of fool around a little bit. So our closing concert this season is the music for modern times. And please don't not come just because you don't like modern music, okay? Because there is a lot of gorgeous music in that set. We're working hard at it, and it features Benjamin Britten's "Rejoice in the Lamb," which, if you need some, soul and spirit support, as many of us do right now, it's about as good as you can get. Amanda will be conducting that piece, interspersed with other pieces that I'll conduct. Part song in the Romantic era is a more or less chronological. As a matter of fact, it's almost strictly chronological presentation by, and this is sort of arbitrary, by date of birth. So if you come to the concert, you'll find we bracket the first set with Mendelssohn, and we bracket the second set with Brahms. But within that, those brackets, time goes forward, at least more or less, because some people did it's by birth date. And man, I was so excited just to discover. I mean, I do this programming, Amanda and I do this programming, and a lot of times by the time we get to the brochure, we still don't know exactly what we're going to be doing, and we're still making choices. And sometimes you're kind of flying on a wing and a prayer. Yeah, and you just hope, and then you look and look and look and look, and when you find the piece, it feels like an orgasm or something. And it's just insane. It's so gratifying when we find a piece that just fits perfectly and makes the length that you want. So this concert, just FYI, was that kind of concert where it was like white heat for 3 days straight, pretty much. In any case, we're just going to touch on a couple of pieces just to give you an idea of what that concert will be like. First of all, by Moritz Hauptmann, we're going to do a little bit of his Nun Herr, was soll ich mich trösten? He was born in 1792, and so he lived the bulk of his life obviously, in the 19th century. This is a sacred piece based upon Psalm 39. Here's how it starts.
Nun, Herr, wes sollt ich mich getrösten? Getreuer Gott, ich hoff auf dich. Noch nie hast du verlassen mich. Noch nie hast du verlassen mich. Wes sollt ich frohe mich getrösten? Wes sollt ich frohe mich getrösten? Getreuer Gott, ich hoff auf dich.
So that's a very heartfelt and distressed psalm. And as you'll hear if you come to the concert, it gets really wrapped up. It's very intense. And the next and second and the second one I'd like to feature is something very different. This is a piece by Amy Beach, obviously a woman, but also one of the first successful women composers in the United States. She was born in 1867 and lived till 1944. And coming upon her music, which I really had never heard, I knew the name, but I never had heard anything by her, was a real revelation. We're going to play for you just a little excerpt of this beautiful setting of the Nunc Dimittis. Lord, now let thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast openly prepared before the face of all people. And this particular recording just got me. It just got me as soon as I found it on YouTube. And of course, it's always a little better when you can see what's going on. Anyway, just listen to the beginning of this Amy Beach piece. You might end up being a fan. So as you could tell, it's gorgeous. And if you know Saint Seraphim, you know this stuff is perfect for Saint Seraphim. We're really excited about it. I'll turn it back over to Amanda now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Bob, for that introduction. And it sort of primed me for my part, just hearing that beautiful music and getting into the mindset. And I do think, too, that if you're thinking of coming to the Brahms, that this is a good sort of foretaste of what is to come in the Brahms as well. So I want to just talk a little bit about the title of this and sort of how I structured my talk for this evening. The title, Johannes Brahms and the Geometry of Hope, got me really thinking about form and structure and the experience of the listener as they listen to these pieces. And so, what I'm hoping to do today is give you a little bit of an introduction to both the Schicksalslied and the Requiem in sort of like we'll look at the shape of the pieces and experience the pieces in that way. And then hopefully you'll have a little bit of a different viewpoint when you approach the piece, if you're approaching it as a singer or as a listener next month. So I'm going to give you just some fast facts. Obviously, there's a lot to know about Brahms, and likely many of you already know many of these things, but I just wrote down a couple things that came into my mind as I was thinking about the talk and things that you might want to know or might be helpful to know as we go through the music together. So these are both photos of Brahms. A lot of times folks will associate Brahms with the picture on the right, the sort of older, I don't know, grizzly bear type of look. But the Requiem and the Schicksalslied were both written when Brahms was in his 30s and before. And so I think probably the photo on the left, he's younger than in his 30s, but he might be closer to the photo on the left than the one on the right. He lived from 1833 to 1897. Um, he was, as many of you know, very close with the Schumanns, and he had a working relationship with both Robert and Clara, and a complicated and thorny friendship with Clara throughout her whole lifetime. And Robert Schumann wrote an essay when Brahms was young, basically saying, like, he's going to be the next big deal. And it put a lot of pressure on Brahms, and Brahms was very particular about his compositions, sort of a perfectionist, would throw out works if they didn't meet his standard. And so I think that it did inform perhaps his life and his compositions, comparing him to Beethoven and some of the greats that came before. Brahms didn't end up composing or finishing a symphony until well into his 40s and had been composing for a long time before that. We'll be talking about the Schicksalslied and the Requiem, which he did finish in his 30s. And you start to see that he's putting together the pieces to head towards writing a symphony, which would come later in his life. There are Brahms had a complicated relationship with women. Two important women in his life, as mentioned, were Clara Schumann and his mom, Christiane Brahms. And I would say that his closest relationships were with them. He was never married, and he had expectations for women and would often run into trouble or he would sort of break off relationships with women if they didn't meet his sort of impossible standards of both sort of motherly and virginal. And so, we'll come back to this later when we talk about the fifth movement of the Requiem, but just something of note. Some things that may have been influential to Brahms writing the Requiem, the decline and death of Robert Schumann, and then also the death of his mother. Let's see, I mentioned that, composing for orchestra, no symphony until 1876. He was an early music lover. He had plenty of Bach scores, Schütz scores, was very aware of composers who came before him and performed them and conducted them, studied them, had marked scores, and really thought about his composition in sort of a backwards looking and forwards facing way. It's a very particular Brahmsian style, which, juxtaposed at the same time as composers like Liszt and Wagner, who were like, let's move full steam ahead and not look back at the composers who came before us. The Schicksalslied was performed first in 1871, and the text comes from Friedrich Hölderlin's Hyperion, which is a book, and the poetry is actually interpolated into the novel. And when Brahms first read the text, he was off on summer getaway, which he loved to do that, and was so excited by reading this poem that he actually like went home so that he could compose a piece for it. And then the Requiem, biblical texts, all chosen by Brahms, who interestingly was not a religious person, although he was very well versed with the Bible, the Lutheran Bible in particular. He had one on hand that was marked up, and clearly, as you'll see later, the texts that he chose were very meaningful to him in his life. All right, so a few fast facts. Let's dive into some of the music. So the first piece that we'll be talking about today is the Schicksalslied, and this piece is about a 15-minute long, 15 to 18, depending on how slowly you're going, piece of music, and it's written for orchestra and choir. And it starts off, we sort of have this storyline in front of us. It starts off with beautiful orchestral introduction, and we're sort of in this celestial space of beauty, no tension, and Brahms writes this without any sort of dissonance. Everything feels flowy, everything feels wonderful, and the first choir entrance, the choir comes in and sings in that same celestial vein. And so I have this sort of image in mind that when we start, as I've told the choir, we are gods on Mount Olympus eating grapes, right? Not a care in the world. This is our approach to the opening of this piece. And about half of the piece passes by in that way. And we take the first sort of shape that we're going to see is we take a sharp dive down from the heavens to earth. And so I have this big red arrow because the change is very it happens quickly, and you're never looking back pretty much. And this here is the image that comes to mind for the folks on Earth. It's pretty grim. So you can see we're sort of thrashing about. Things are looking bad. And this lasts through the rest of the choral singing in the piece. Now, the poetry ends there. So it ends with us thrashing about between the rocks. I'll read a little bit of the text here. Actually, do I have the text on me? So we start off in heaven, not a care in the world. And then once we get down into the earthly space, we're being flung from rock to rock and down to the depths below for eternity. And it feels very hopeless. The feel of it is hopeless. And not only that, he like ratchets it up the second time we repeat that same text, where we're being thrown from cliff to cliff. He raises it up by a half step, makes it even more desperate, and that's where the choir stops, is just being sort of in that hopeless state. Now, Brahms struggled a little bit. There's some letters back and forth where he was talking to friends about whether or not he wanted to end the piece there, because that's where the poetry ends. And what he decided to do was to write an orchestral outro, essentially, but the outro ends in a different key than the opening. And we see this a lot in more modern music, but at the time, it was sort of unusual to go back to a major key, but not the same home key that we started in. So we start in E flat major, and then we go into C minor, and then C, well, we go into various minor keys and then end up in C major. So I have this little upwards arrow here with a couple question marks. We sort of have this feeling of like, maybe things are gonna be okay. But I have to say that the Schicksalslied, the general feel of it is hopeless. And it's a very interesting piece to perform because, you know, we find a lot of care and hope and solace in performing music. And so to do a piece like this, it sort of stretches your capability on like, okay, can music also do this? Can music also live in this space? So that's a little intro to how the structure of the Schicksalslied works, and I want to play some examples for you so that you have an idea of this celestial space and then earthly space. Here's the orchestral introduction, or just a little snippet of it. I had a very hard time deciding on what snippets to share with you because I just want to keep listening. It is very difficult for me to stop at any point with all of these examples. But the one thing I will note about the orchestral introduction is that it is gorgeous. It's beautifully written. It's sort of in this space. And yet, there is that timpani that you saw, that timpani player that is sort of playing that fate motif. Dun, 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 dun done that sort of lives underneath the orchestral introduction. So you know things are going to take a turn at some point, but not yet. Let's hear some of this celestial beings up on Mount Olympus, laying back and eating grapes. Again, you hear dum, 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 dum right at the end. But also, what the choir is singing about is just really sort of like this heavenly music that is being created up in this space, and it just really creates a dreamy, dreamy space. and then we're sort of crashed down into reality. And in this next section that I'll play for you, it is sort of earthly strife. And I'm going to play something later that is sort of similar in musical language, but the difference between my later example and this example is that this example is hopeless, and the other example has a fighter spirit to it. And so I'll bring that back. Hopefully, I'll remember to bring that back with one of my examples a little bit later, but you'll really hear Viva se von Klippe zu Klippe, really rhythmically jagged lines that are really, it feels that we are being thrown against rocks, and that like I imagine us falling downward. I imagine water. I imagine no hope, looking up. Like that is sort of the energy that I get from this section. And it happens after 9 minutes of the other stuff. So just to sort of put that in your mind as well. Quite different energetically, a lot more dissonant harmonic language, tons of fully diminished seventh chords, a lot of uh, just pulling and tension in comparison to consonance beauty. And thank goodness we don't have to end the concert with this piece, because I think it would end it in a different space. Interestingly, Brahms composed this piece after the Requiem, and it's just sort of interesting to think about composers' lives and the things maybe they were sparked by inspiration of a piece of poetry, and then maybe also personally invested in a certain collection of texts. And I think that maybe Brahms was really sparked by this poetry, but I think that in his heart space, the Requiem is where he lives, and the messages of the Requiem is where he lives personally. And thank goodness for it, because yeah, we could do with a little of that. So let's dive into the Requiem. So, as I was talking about the geometry of hope, this just made me think, okay, what is the experience of the listener or the singer as you sing through this piece? And I really think of it as a journey, and you're journeying from, a starting place to an ending place. But I do think that there is a peak to the piece, and I also think there are parallels along the way. So you are not the same when you come back down to the other side of the mountain, but you might see some similarities. So I've put in the numbers of the movements on this mountain, and we start from the first movement. When we reach the fourth movement, we're sort of at the summit and enjoying it. And then we journey back down. And along the way, we've learned things, we've grown, we've reflected, we've grappled, And we are changed, but we also return. And so I think that that's sort of the real feel of the piece as a whole. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start us at the lower elevation, and we're just going to work our way up in elevation over the course of the rest of this talk. And what I hope to give to you is just some little guideposts along the way of how these pieces or how these movements can inform each other and how they can sort of be partners with each other in a non-chronological order. And so we're going to go kind of out of order. We're not going to listen to the pieces in order tonight, and see some similarities along the way. So we're going to start with movement 1 and movement 7. And I got to move you all around here a little bit so that I can see my screen. Okay. So we have the first two of the texts that I'm going to be talking about. The first movement, Selig sind die da Leid tragen, and then in the seventh, Selig sind die Toten. And we start with blessed are those who bear sorrow. So these are the folks who are mourning the dead. So typically a requiem or a requiem mass is going to be highlighting the dead. And really what Brahms did was spent a whole lot of time thinking about the living, or those that maybe are left behind and are mourning those who have passed. And so there's something really living about this requiem in a different way than a lot of other requiems that we know, like the Mozart or the Verdi or whatever other requiems that you have in your mind. Just a couple similarities off the bat. You can tell that the text has some similarities. Musically, there are similarities. We actually come back to some of the same themes that happen in the first movement again in the seventh movement. And when we come back, ooh, it is the best moment to return to Selig sind There's kind of not anything better than that moment when you return. Other similarities, both in F major, we have modulations that happen, and they sort of happen like this. In the first movement, you go down a third, in the second movement, you go up a third. Who knows? I think maybe Brahms was thinking about it in that structural way, as there are other similarities of key centers along the way in the Requiem as well. Just something to notice. Some other things that come up for me, it's comfort for the living. And that I think that goes from movements 1 to 6. And it includes 7 too, just because I think really the comfort that one receives when receiving this text and thinking about this text and singing this music and absorbing this music is that there is comfort, and that we will be comforted even if we are mourning, and through mourning we will be comforted. So it is about mourning the death of loved people. And there's a lot of talk of death in this piece of music. But there's a whole lot of conquering death. There's a whole lot of finding the joy. Joy is actually the word that's repeated the most in the Requiem. And so that is actually like the theme that comes back, the mood that comes back is joy. Legacy and journey. I think at the beginning and ending of our piece, I really am thinking about what a person that we loved had left behind, and also the journey that we take through grief to the other side to celebrate that loved person. And also that their works will be remembered all their days, right? And that we will remember the things that were beloved about those people that we lost. Honoring the dead. Oop, and that's it, I suppose. So I've done a couple of little notes on each one of these to give you some ideas. And then I wanted to dive into some musical examples. And the first musical example from the Requiem is actually not from the Requiem. I just wanted to give you a little bit of some Heinrich Schütz, because Brahms was influenced by his music, I think, when it came to writing the Requiem, including some of Schütz's funeral music, and is using same texts as Schütz did. And also this piece, this Selig sind die Toten by Schütz is just the best ever. And so I want to play it a little bit, and I want you to keep it in mind. And I also want you to, if you're a fan of Bach, I want you to keep him in mind, and maybe Handel, keep him in mind as we listen to some of these examples. There's also some like madrigalian feel in some of the examples that I'm going to play for you today. So keep all of those that had come before Brahms. They really do inform his music. So here we go. Here's some Schütz. So Brahms will use the same text in the seventh movement of the Requiem, and he treats, yes, the Spirit speaks in a different way than Schütz does, but it has the same um, steadiness and um, just just sort of grounded knowledge that this is right. This text is true. I want to just as a heads up, as we're going through these musical examples of the Brahms, I've put the text translation of the particular portion that I'm playing for you so that you can see what text you're listening to just above the video that's playing. So the musical example that I'm playing for you from the first movement is actually the recapitulation of the original opening. Blessed are those who bear sorrow, for they shall be comforted. And one thing I want to say and just not leave behind from the first movement is that some of the most beautiful language that I find in that first movement is the language of uh, those who sow in tears will reap in joy. And that to me, it's like we're starting our journey, right? We're going up this mountain, and along the way, we're planting seeds. And we will continue to journey. And this doesn't make logical sense, but by the time we come back to the other side, we reap the joy from the journey along the way. And that it also shows up in other places when we get to the second movement and we're talking about the farmer. I'll get to it, but the farmer waiting for the rain, it all is connected to this mourning that is so important that we move through in order to remember the loved one and remember the joy, and to just carry that joy and carry the memory of that person with us in the fullest iteration that we can, because we have spent time looking at the ground, feeling it, and sowing our seeds and then reaping the joy. the Getröstet werd. That just that language of comfort and the way that Brahms writes it so gently, it just shines through every time, and we repeat it over and over again in different ways with different voicings. But comfort is the definite theme of the first movement. And it reminds me, I'm just thinking back to when we performed Messiah a couple years ago, and that comforty is the first thing that we hear too. And that comfort is maybe one of the most powerful um, messages we can get across, and it through music, maybe. I don't know. It's so special. And then finally for the seventh movement, I'm playing again this Ja, der Geist spricht. This is yes, the Spirit speaks. They that rest from their labors, for their works follow after them. And there's something mystical about the way that Brahms sets this. There's the Spirit has the feel of a spirit, and then it just sort of moves us forward into this certainty that yes, this is what will occur. I love in that example, and there are other examples throughout the Requiem where Brahms chooses to drop out the entire orchestra and just have the choir sing, and it really sort of zooms you in into the text, and this moment is important. And then he sort of weaves back in the horns or weaves back in the strings that come in and support us through the rest of the phrase. It's just glorious, glorious stuff. Right, so we're moving up our mountain here. We've planted our seeds through the first movement. We've found our joy through the seventh movement, and now we're moving into up elevation number 2 and number 6. And these ones are biggies. These ones are the sort of longest movements of the piece. They contain big old fugues. We are sort of grappling with death. And in both cases, we come out triumphant. And so let me just highlight a couple of things for this one before we listen to some examples. So we have "For all flesh is as grass." And again, with the like nature images that Brahms chooses in his biblical text, I think is it's meaningful. I think it's meaningful to him. I think he was an avid hiker and walker and enjoyed being out in nature and was very influenced by his natural surroundings. And I think probably he found some kinship in these biblical verses as well. And I think in this second movement, it starts off in this sort of big, sort of funeral dirge that has a lot of weight to it. Dum, 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 da dum, dum. And Brahms actually started working on this piece of music as an instrumental movement on its own after Robert Schumann had jumped into the Rhine and continued to deteriorate in health. And so he took some of that instrumental material and then put it into this second movement. And so I think he was certainly thinking, or probably likely that he was thinking about Schumann as he was sort of grappling with this image of death. For all flesh is as grass, and all glory of man as the flower of the grass. The grass has withered, and the flower fallen off. And then the theme that I think for number 2 and number 6 is patience. And the text that comes next is, so be now patient, beloved brothers, unto the future of the Lord. See, a farmer waits for the delicious fruit of the earth and is patient about it until he receives the morning rain and the evening rain. And then we say, but the Lord's word remains through eternity. The redeemed of the Lord will return and come to Zion with rejoicing. Eternal joy will be on their heads. And so we go from everything, death, bad, looking at the ground, maybe observing those seeds that we've sown with our tears and looking and thinking and mourning, and then waiting and waiting for the joy that is certain to come. And Brahms is certain that it will come. By the way he compiled these verses together, it is there in the music. And then in the sixth movement, we have, for here, we have no permanent place. We rather seek the future. This is where the sound of the last trumpet, or in German, trombone. Let's see, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead will rise imperishable, and we will become changed. Death, where is your sting? Hell, where is your victory? And then we go into a glorious fugue of Lord, you are worthy to receive glory, honor, and power. And so what I'll say about the sixth movement is that it sort of serves as, or maybe both of these movements sort of serve as Brahms' dies irae, maybe, of like other requiems. It's sort of that idea of fire and brimstone without the fire and brimstone, or sort of like more grappling with death and coming out on top. Movement 6, the example that I'm going to share with you, is that example where in the Schicksalslied was hopeless, moving from rock to rock. And in the Requiem, the example that I'll play for you, it's almost like we're sitting on a ship together and it's stormy out, but we know that this crew is going to make it through the storm, and that we band together and we feel those waves crashing on us, but we're like, bring it on, bring it on. And that is sort of the difference in feel. Even though musically they kind of have some of the same energy, it has a totally different emotional energy as you sing those two different parts. We're dealing with death and sorrow and moving into joy. We will come out on top. Big fugues, Baroque influence, of course, important here, and patience. I'll just add that these are huge lifts for singers. They're very long movements, and they go on, and they're hard, and they're high. And I think, the premiere of the full Requiem had a choir that was over 100 voices, and I think you need it, right? It just is a lift for the choir. So, what I want to share with you from the second movement is like my favorite part, and it's maybe not the most, I don't know, when you think of the second movement, you probably think of the opening and the unison singing on For All Flesh as Grass, but I love the farmer waiting for the delicious fruit of the earth. And you can hear the morning rain in the flute and in sort of the pizzicato strings. It's just a beautiful image. So here is from the second movement. And that leads us right back into dum, 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 da, dum, dum. But I also really enjoy that that Brahms uses, it reiterates the text. So be patient. So be patient. Because we're not through the darkness yet. And so we have to experience that again. And then we have that Abba that happens later, but we still have more to go through. So just taking us on this journey through grief, through death, through it, not rushing through it, living through it. And then let's be on this stormy ship together, but we know that that we will overcome it. Oh, I'm sorry that I have to cut these off. I just want to keep listening. I hope that you, after you get off this call, you just go onto YouTube and listen to the whole Requiem. That's what I want to do after this. All right, let's continue up our journey. So we've gone through a lot. We've sort of addressed our feelings. We've thought about the blessings that are to come. We've grappled with death. We've defeated death. And I'm talking about 1 and 7, 2 and 6. And here we are sort of at this elevation right before the summit. And so we have movements 3 and 5. And there's something a little bit unique about this section in that Brahms didn't write the fifth movement until later. But I still think that that the structure works. These two movements both feature soloists, and I think that it is sort of like the journey of these movements are more personal. I think that it's not sort of like these ideas of death or of blessings or sort of big ideas. It's more like, what about my soul? Like that's sort of where I feel like these movements live. And we start with the now Lord how well the text. Let me pull up the text here for the third movement and read a little bit for you. So we have, Lord, teach me well that there must be an end for me, and my life has a finish, and I must away. So we're thinking about our own death at this moment, and we're grappling with that, not sort of the bigger idea of death anymore. We're thinking about us. And where I think the sort of pinnacle of this movement is, now, Lord, how shall I comfort myself? And I hope in you. And then we sort of take a turn and know that we will find comfort in being in the hand of God, basically, that we're not going to be let down. And that hand of God actually shows up musically as a pedal point that happens throughout the whole fugue. The fugue is sort of bouncing around on top, and we have that steady D all the way through the fugue in the third movement, where we find steadiness of what is going to happen to me when I die. And then in the fifth movement, we have sort of this, like, I imagine it as a movie, and it's as if, it's like the person is daydreaming, or they're dreaming of their mother or some angelic person that has meant a lot to them in their lives. And this kind of goes back to sort of Brahms' ideal of, or sort of feeling about women. And I think that his solo writing in this movement is sort of like pictures that. It's this perfect, motherly, perfect vision of a woman who will comfort him or who will comfort us. And I think that we can extrapolate that into bigger ideas and not just sort of Brahms' relationship with women. But I think that it's interesting to note how he wrote this movement as well. There's a big fugue in number 3. I'm just looking at my notes here. So movement 3, I think, is the soul's personal question or of mortality. And then in our movie scene, we're seeing this woman, and she sort of is already in the beyond. And she is saying, it's going to be okay. I'm going to comfort you. You will be comforted. You will get through this. And it's almost like throughout the fifth movement, she's like slowly backing away and leaving us to continue on with our journey. And it's this just sort of beautiful image of comfort. I mentioned to the choir that this movement feels like somebody coming up behind you and rubbing your back and just giving you that loving comfort that feels homey, that feels pure, that feels like you could get through anything. And that might make you cry, but it's just sort of that feel. Let's see. We have these, as I've mentioned, solo movements, facing mortality, I think, number 3, and then offering solace, number 5. Question and answer for the soul is sort of how I think about how these movements relate to each other. So the first example that I'll share with you is sort of the pivot moment in movement 3. And I haven't given you a fugue yet, so I got to give you a fugue. And I chose to give you the fugue from number 3. And so we'll listen to a little bit of this. And just as a note, I love this recording of the Requiem. It's been one that I've come back to on YouTube over and over. But man, does she take this fugue fast. It goes, and it's exciting to listen to. But we have this moment, now, Lord, how shall I comfort myself? And then I hope in you. And this just builds up and up and up and up. And then we have the fugue that follows after that. So that's sort of what you're going to be experiencing as you listen to this example.
Wes soll ich mich trösten?
Here is the hope. I hope in you. Very impressive performance that fugue. Really enjoyable to watch Greta Peterson conduct it too. And then the from the fifth movement, I will comfort you as one is comforted by his mother. And this is sort of the conversation between the soloist and the choir. There's much more solo material than what I'm playing tonight, and the solo material is excellent also. So just go and listen to movements 3 and 5 and 6 to hear those solo movements as well. I just imagine her as she's singing da 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 da, like just sort of disappearing into the sky, right? And it sort of is like it feels like it never ends because she never resolves to the tonic, right? She sort of just da 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 dum da 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 dum, and finally the orchestra goes, okay. Dum, dum. But that sort of unanswered question from the soprano solos, I feel like is almost feels like I'm always going to be there. Like I'm always going to be there. I'm right here while you're going through whatever you're going through. Don't forget that you can get your comfort from me. We've made it. We've summited the mountain. The final movement that I'll be talking about this evening is number 4, and this one is one that is often performed as a standalone piece. Probably the most well-known movement of the Requiem, Wie lieblich, and so maybe you know this movement because you sang it in choir in high school or in college, and it just has a special place. And it really does belong on the summit of this mountain because it's a time to stand back and look and to just take a breath. And there's not a whole lot of grappling happening in this movement. It's sort of just basking in the beauty and the glory of the dwelling place of the Lord of Hosts, right? So there really is not any sort of question in this. It's just praise. It's just praise. And it has a special spot, I think, in the Requiem, being in the middle of, we have movements 1 through 3, this movement 4, and then we climb back down the mountain. And there's a lot still left to do, but let's just take a minute and look around us, and see what we've gone through and prepare for what we are still to go through. It does have sort of that chorale feeling. There's a lot of I don't know, it's homophonic in a lot of places. We sing together a lot, in the same way that we do sort of in the Selig sind, and then also when we're singing about having patience while we wait for our seeds to grow. Um, Praise, joy, hope, comfort, those are the things that come to mind for me. Mountains, forests, open sky, like it is just the beauty of the earth, and like maybe being at the top of this peak, like we're closer to heaven, and just sort of looking out on the beauty of this life, and what we see in the beauty of the earth and of others. So I'll be playing a little bit of the little fugue that happens at the end of this one. They praise you evermore. How lovely are your dwellings, Lord of hosts. I could just keep listening to it too. Um, it's the heart of the Requiem. It is this moment of pure joy, pure light, awe, just the feeling of nothing else needs to change. Everything is just right as it is. And I think that is sometimes a journey or part of the journey through grief is recognizing that there is no going back and all is well. It will be okay. We will get through it. And not only that, we're going to end up carrying with us the most beautiful gift of a life of a person that we care deeply about. So I have just some final thoughts. I I pulled this image because this may have been one of the locations that Brahms summered in Switzerland, and would probably love to look at this landscape. And I'm just gonna share a few quotes with you of some things that I've read and studied along the way as I've prepared for this performance coming up in April and thought a lot about this piece of music. And I think these quotes really sort of sum up some of the big feelings that I have about this piece of music. And it has just been a true gift to be able to dig in and conduct this piece. And not only that, but to conduct a wonderful group of people who I love and get to cherish it with. It is so special. And I didn't know that I would ever get to do this in my life. And it's just a piece of music that I think will live with me forever and will influence the way that I think about death. And it will change the way that I engage with it, I think. And I think that it probably did the same for Brahms. I think it really helped him, or maybe gave him some relief, and just helped him move through it. So the first quote is from a book called Sowing Tears, Reaping Joy, The Bible and Brahms Requiem by Karen M. Bechtel. The Requiem is anything but random. In a way, it takes us on a journey, not necessarily from grief to hope, but through grief in hope. I just think that that turn of phrase is just right. It's just right. Not necessarily from grief to hope, but through grief in hope. It ends gently as the work began, without Beethovenian perorations or Handelian kettle drums, but with submission to the inevitable, a peace not of paradise, but of deepest rest. And that's from Jan Swafford from the excellent Brahms biography. And then finally, from Clara herself, the Requiem has taken a hold of me as no other sacred music ever did before. It was such a joy. Oh, it was a joy such as I have not felt for a long time. And then she wrote that in one of her many journals after the premiere in 1869 that she attended. So that's all from me tonight. Thank you so much for coming.